Hello. I shared a video below by Heidi Priebe. It's a discussion with Denzel Mensah and Christian Rivera on men are trash and how this affects men's mental health and stuff. The conversation covered a lot of different things and it explored very well as far as I'm concerned. And I'm just adding my own rough thoughts. I quickly jotted down. Like, there are many problems with this topic and how it can be approached. So I offer my first reaction on how I approach it. I think the topic is mainly about how one relates to their experiences, understands people, loves, and critiques them. There's a folk psychology people develop from a lack of expertise and experience in examining experiences. I find often we may experience but not understand accurately or approximately. We also do not characterize the experiences in their openness relative to all that comprise them as being subject to tones, levels, rules, and controls of interpretation. Experiences can have different genre frames, being capable of being put on them depending on how one decodes. In this case, with people, their internal state. Like an example is like I wrote this play where one of my fictional characters, it's a female. It's a girl and she slaps her friend on the neck, who's a boy. And within the framing, like the meta frame or like the external audience frame, it's comedic within the context of the play. But from the guy's perspective, it's abusive or it's unwarranted. So depending on which genre and which points of view you're taking, you can frame a situation to interpret it a particular way. And I think this also happens a lot in life too, with how situations play out, and depending on what level of resolution and what angle or what distance of intimacy, of attachment to non-attachment you take to the situation and how you try to render it. There's much complexity in life, not just with situations, but with people. For instance, my own contrasting relationship with goodness is like there's I guess they take to goodness as far as like sociality, like pro-social, but also take to goodness as far as what's good for the self and what's a good orient, what's like I keep using good, like what's a beneficial orientation, a healthy orientation, uh, a dominating orientation, depending on when dominance is needed and not submission, a humble orientation, like depending on whatever class of orientation or activity or class of framing or sense of valuing or evaluating a situation is warranted in the situation. And so, in this regard, sometimes I'll find goodness or even wholesomeness uh, desirable. Other times I'll find it boring, or I'll be indifferent towards it, or I'll find it weak and just want vitality and strength, or just want to have fun and so on. And I feel like this situation is what may characterize how people may interact. Like behind this conversation of men are trash is an evaluation of men morally. It's not just men in terms of their utility, in terms of their capacity, because objectively speaking, I think you can tell that men have accomplished lots of things that they kept women from, at least in Western society and in other cultures. Like it depends on how what you're looking at, and I can't get into specifics, but in general, like if you think of many human products as being established by men and relegating women to the domestic and relegating women to children and maybe gathering and other like washing clothes and things like that, while men will build buildings or they'll start institutions or they'll maintain things, they'll develop things and stuff like that. Men have done a lot of good for the world, even though they've also done a lot of bad and made lots of bad decisions. And when women get put in a position of power too, like I remember there was a statistic I was looking at how like even female rulers are still warmongering. Like they're not like there tends to be a stereotype that if women ruled the world or if women were in a position of power that they would play different power games or that the world would be more compassionate and loving. But there's a dimension to this that's more a matter of human nature and how people naturally have to play the game, so to speak, in terms of power, in terms of achieving their modeled rewards, like whether it's the different hierarchy of needs and Maslow's hierarchy for from physiological needs to self-actualization and to the last one that he didn't get to put, which is self-transcendence, where you serve something that's greater than yourself or when you serve God or something like that. So this is all the stuff that comprises the topic, and it's what makes the topic weird because it's very hard to fully judge people on their, I guess, full quality Like I've been reading or I've been thinking about Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, and in it, Dostoevsky presents a group of people like brothers who are very fragmented in their psychology. One represents the intellect, one represents, I guess, the heart, and the other represents the appetites or the sensuality. And they need to all round out. And this is a good uh, allegory for what comprises us sometimes, where we're not rounded out in each of these areas, where our lacks or deficiencies and our capacity to misuse or misexpress or misalign or be or not even if it's not an agency feature, even if it's not us being the problem, but us being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or certain things that may happen to us, things we may attract, or things we may repel, opportunities we may miss. This all causes the problems that we experience. So this causes a lot of complexity. And I use complexity in multiple ways I've encountered it. Like there's complexity of known knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns, and unknowables. I also use complexity in regards to complexity theory, where there are interactions and feedback loops, or predictable and unpredictable states constrained by order generating rules. So there's this feature of uh, trying to like get at all the different complex interactions that can happen between men and women, and how there are certain rules that generate. And these rules can be that of attraction, repulsion, satisfaction, avoidance, exploration, all fostering different stylizations of situations and modes of relations. And these modes of relations are sort of like all the different ways you can relate to somebody, be it competitively, be it beneficially, parasitically, uh, be it mutual benefit, be it a coloring of, like, say, within even our sexuality, we can have like friends with benefits as a notion, or we can have merely a sexual relationship without any friendship and so on. Like there can be all sorts of different modes that we relate to each other. Complexity can also be in a sense of folds that cause symmetries, reciprocities, I mean, and different ways these can manner out with a topic. Like like and this is what can characterize molded relationships if you're looking at just molded relationships. Like there can be symmetries, they can be sort of like ways things balance out or match each other, or can be reciprocities where there can be an exchange. Sometimes it can be transactional, or sometimes it can just be like it's not as mechanical as it sounds. Like it can still be transactional, but it can also have like a different coloring to it. It can have an emotional coloring to it. And then there can be different ways these manner out with the topic. And that's one of the issues that also makes this topic very difficult, because there are different modes of relationships with men and women. And like there's no universal situation that men and women actually, there might be some universals, but the universals don't play out in the same way in real time. Like whatever you imagine that somebody's experience is, there's always certain details or certain nuances or certain dimensions that are subtly different, whether it's the appearance of the person. Like it can be sort of like you can sort of like typecast people into how into what they can express or what they can do or whatnot. I'll get into that. I'll get more into it. I'll just keep going. I'll come back to this. Anyway, in conversation, there happens many literary devices of allusion, metaphor, irony, entendres, and so on. And I think people gaining a skill in these will help them to get a grip when they take this time to perceive and form models. I suspect cognitively people need better metaframes that allow them to factor the variations and possibilities they can encounter. Like Henri Bergson had this notion that possibility comes from the real. Like a possibility is just a mirage of the past and the present, whereas something is only possible because it's been done before. So there's a sense with people, because they can be like, once a person or once something has occurred in life, there's a sense it can happen again. And I feel like this is what characterizes men and women's sometimes borderline paranoia towards each other when it comes to how they see how the other can exploit them, or what that other person can do to them, or what the other person will not do for them, and so on. The possibilities are just as important as the realized experiences people have, especially within the constraints of typicality and plausibility with the freedom of anomaly. They're what I feel is struggled with most. In short, it's due to a lack of imaginative exploration. Like I feel like people also they tend to keep mainly to their own immediate localized experiences. And the only reason why people seem to have people have an artificial sense of having a great store of experience to draw from because of the social connections that they have and the virtual connections that they have, like online, where they can see all sorts of different people's experiences, where they're like, oh, this is what women are going through, or this is what men are going through. Like you can group them all together so you can form a category or a taxonomy of experiences that people are having and be like, these are all the things that are going on with people. But in actuality, one mainly knows their own immediate experiences and plausibly the experiences of those that are close to them that they know directly, intimately, and so on. And the rest become mere abstractions. And so once you have these immediate experiences and the intimate experiences, your intimate experiences, and these become sort of like variations of possibilities that can happen in life. And without being able to like induce more possibilities, like you'll constantly be sort of like blindsided by what can happen, where you're like, I never knew that could happen, or I'm so devastated that this happened. And to me, that's kind of weird. Like, if, because especially the older you get and the more you understand life, the more there's a sense of like almost any absurd thing can happen within constraints or within the inherent tendencies of how things play out or within context and so on. There are different things that can like come together, things that can come apart based on how people are emotionally, physiologically, situationally, and so on. Also, there's a difference between fancy and imagination, according to psychology and Kilgrist. Like fancy is more like imagining unicorns and flying witches and stuff like that, things that you can say don't happen. While imagination is sort of like if you're doing forensics, you'll imagine like how like you'll imagine into something, a situation, like how it came to unfold. Like a lot of fiction, writers, they don't tend to, unless they're writing fantasy or something. But even then, there's this a play of fancy and imagination where they can really imagine into a character and through them, like how they'll behave and how they'll react and how they're feeling. So imagination can guarantee insight. It actually helps you feel into towards accuracy, towards different dimensions of reality and so on. Anyway, when people receive a social cue or preference, they form algorithms for how to navigate if they are not improvising, such as most women on average as a distribution don't like rough play and are sensitive to emotional aggression. The algorithmic tendency of mining with the heuristics are mental and emotional shortcuts people use. These are not comprehensively adaptive nor perceptive into, if not how, the various what with how a pattern of being that can come about. They serve for decisiveness in many cases. So I'm not saying to shortchange the algorithms and heuristics, but they don't cultivate wisdom, which requires a meta on reasoning organically and having a large schema to draw from and extrapolate potentials from. So like people tend to like form different algorithms for and like different mental shortcuts for how to evaluate situations. And I think that's one of the things that also goes on too, where there's no cultivated understanding. There's just like a quick like, oh, this happened, and therefore I emotionally judge it as bad, and that's that. Or this happened. So based on my experiences, I suspect that this is what happened. Like there's no more careful investigation or deliberation that takes place. Of course, I'm not saying to overthink because there's a benefit to these quick heuristics, these algorithms that they help you be decisive. But I'm saying that one has to be aware that they're algorithms, how one has to be aware that they're heuristics and they're not naturally understanding, they're not comprehensive, and they're not naturally in depth. Men and women, relative to their distribution, not their categories, receive different stylizations of messages and experiences. In a social, interpreting these stylizations can be brought to the forefront with coining of new phrases, ideas to get a grip on situations that are common. Like, I feel like this topic requires almost more keenness and more coining of phrases. Like every topic requires this, but like you can coin a phrase or coin a word to describe something that we all have a sense of, to have a different feature of. An example like the humble brag, like the sense of like somebody who will brag, but it will be almost like as if subdued, or it will be like for the background of the situation is bragging. It's like there's a vanity or a pride, but the foreground or even the content or the structure, the form will be sound humble. So the fact that we can have these stylizations typically have contrast, oppositions, levels and domains and rules and displays characterize much of reality, especially social reality, and how we go into stuff, which also ties into genre, of the frame of genre and how we render things. The average person leaves it to academics in their fields to understand and to artists to create, explore, and depict. I think most social creativity, exploration, and perceptiveness is needed to acquire new grips on topics. This can be done by everybody, and of course, some will be better and more useful than others. I think of our discussions on these as a type of literary or artistic engagement and interpretation. The many voices can be fleshed out into organic logics, motives, illustrations that ripen or rot. This all depending on their own health and conditions they inhabit and foster for each other. So I feel like with these issues too, depending on what happens, people's people's different experiences and what they present and how they interpret them, what people tend to call perspectives or best called perceptions, become like different voices in your head. Like I remember my friend Primal Fuckhead Harry Slattery was talking about how like you will hear situations where people would be like, "Oh, you can claim the N word," but then somebody would be like, "If somebody can say the F word," like Kendrick Lamar would be like, "If I can say the F word, uh, then other people can, then white people can say the N word," and so on. And it's like it becomes like you get like this weird surreal structure. It's like one of those optical illusions where things intersect, where things are foreground and background is not fully clear because they can seemingly shift around depending on how you look at it. It becomes like a duck rabbit too, like where the one hand you look at it, it's a duck, one hand you look at it as a rabbit. So you deal with a lot of ambiguity and you don't know how to orient yourself or how to decide or what to characterize or what to credit as the way to experience it or the way to like look at it and so on. So I feel like you just have to flesh them out and let certain things play out in real time and play out in the different meta structures that are going on, the different levels that you're encountering, the different conversations that you're having, and so on. And certain things will ripen, and other things will rot. Like you just have to let their logic and their motives and what they illustrate unfold. You have to like take time to let them come about because this is a process, and I feel like people sometimes rush to the end or they store rules or algorithms like on how to approach, on how to react, and how to take the things. Of course, there are universal things that are like you can easily react to, such as murder or something like that. But there are complex situations where it's like, oh, suppose somebody's going to like kill all your family if you don't murder for them or something like that. So it's like you have to also take that into account. There can be these complex structures that foster different behaviors or actions and so on, and different internal and external motives and so on, and stuff like that. Uh, I hypothesize uh, just as there are logical fallacies, there are emotional fallacies, where emotions, be they as backgrounds or foregrounds, influence how we model and relate to ourselves, others in the world. Emotional fallacies can occur due to undigested, improperly categorized emotions, or an attempt to categorize what is faceted in dynamic and compositional ways. This is, for example, how like some women blame themselves or feel shame when they almost get raped or something. Like I know someone who's very important to me who almost got raped, and they blamed themselves, like they felt like lots of shame, and that was an emotional fallacy to me because it's like, on one hand, it was also a logical fallacy too, interestingly enough, because it was not properly attributed as far as what can cause it. But of course, this becomes a very complex conversation on like how do events come about or how do you contribute to events by virtue of your entanglement. So it depends on what vantage of you take to characterize the situation and the kind of relativity that can come about or the kind of relativity that can be fostered. This is its own topic. So I'm just going through each of these. Each of these I can like write a book about because it's like they're very complex, but I'm just trying to get through them just to like get my thoughts out there and just to see what people think and maybe I'll come back to them depending on what people say. Anyway, there are associated emotional metonyms and gestalts that form a distributed encounter with people. A metonym is sort of like how you may say something like the crown for a king or a queen or something like that, or the throne. Like you'll use a part to reference the whole. So sometimes, like if somebody does something you don't like, you'll take a feature of them and you'll use it to characterize them and you'll attach your negative feelings to them. Like suppose somebody is short or something and maybe you're a woman or something like that, and a man insults you, and the man is short, and they're like, "You're short ass," like you just like you use that to like vent your spleen, and I think that's also what's going on with the situation where with the whole men are trash. There's this whole sense of like, oh, they happen to do this. There can be just sort of like essentialism that can happen, or this sort of like essentializing of the situation where well one of the key components is them being a man and that's why this happened to you or that's why they did this to you or that's why they do this, and to a degree that is true, that is accurate. Like there is there are certain things men are more inclined to do or reoccurring things with men, But I feel like I'll go into this. I'll get to this. Gestalts mainly form from relation, symmetry, and similarity. So when we encounter these with people, we generalize. Like there are also these gestalts that form, like the ways we hold a situation, whether we hold a group based on certain things that they do. Like it goes into like what's the psychology of like how do we characterize a situation? Like that's what I keep coming back to. Like how are you characterizing this? How are you characterizing? These gestalts also have frames whereby we interpret a sentiment by which we characterize others socially with a status. The sentiment can be from winning, health, dominance, security, creativity, wisdom, and so on. When gestalts happen with emotional fallacies, one ends up with a complex oriented rendering of others grouped or rather perceived as a group. The simplistic model is how I account for how men have been characterized. I find the relationship men and women have are sometimes framed by the facticity of being different. Like this is like I feel like some situations with men and women are situations that women even have with women and men have with men. But because there's a fundamental difference in the vehicles, so to speak, or in the vehicle of the tone or the intent or whatever, I guess, metaphysical dimension to us that's going on, we characterize it as a men and women issue. And certain issues are not just a matter of men and women, it's just a human issue in general. Whether the care whether characterized by the domains that are rendered by our animal psychology and its strategies, algorithms, unfolding, valence, or tone of activity, or by domains such as our reflexivity, ability to conceive, decode and code meanings, motives, and intentions, like there are different dimensions to us basically. And these can be these can come about into how we characterize things. With these issues, there are many sentiments that frame situations from dominance, wins, gains, benefits, securities, affections, and so on. And different weathers of our orientation and ideals relative to the regions of cultural climates. We get differences in overlapping concentrics that form the various metaframes above what a locale situation is. Like the different weathers of our orientation is sort of like what I was speaking of with the voices and stuff, how like different people's perspectives can become voices in you. And they feel like a weather within a cultural climate where your inner weather can shift depending on the current cultural climate. And you'll interpret your emotions, and your emotions will interpret you and interpret the situation based on that climate that you're in and so on. Like they're entangled, they're enmeshed with each other. Like we get differences in overlap and concentrics. Like I don't know how to explain this. I lost I lost the thought I was going to generate. But I guess I have to say like there are just differences all across the board, like differences as to what characterizes the situation, how it comes about, and these act like circles within circles and circles overlapping, like sharing categories, sharing with each other, categories, participating with each other, categories, repulsing and attracting different properties of each other, and so on. And these form like the different metaframes, like the situation above that you can look at things from. Because I tend to take on metaframes or take on a third person perspective often, or I tend to be very non-attached when interpreting things. So I don't tend to like look at things from a first person perspective. That's one of the reasons why I'm being so impersonal about discussing this, because I feel like that's for a different video. Or I might get into it. I feel like I wrote some notes to try to get into it, but I'm not very good at it. And like it's very hard for me to talk first person on a topic once I've started impersonal. Anyway, uh it's like every grounded situation is under a particular sky of emotional drives, domains of modeled rewards to borrow from Joe Shabbat, characterizing Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There are longings, whims, distractions, and what Christian Rivera put as tensions and explosions. So, yeah, I think that's pretty self explanatory. I have felt guilt for the deeds of all men. Like, that's how this affected my health. Like, I remember as I looked at myself and how I've been towards women or even been towards girls when I was growing up, and the different ways I've been mindless or my sometimes it wasn't malevolence, it was playfulness or dishonest ways of trying to achieve an ends or trying to achieve companionship or trying to be useful or trying to have a relationship and so on. Like there's a capacity for self-deception. Like I used to feel guilty for all the things that men did. So I was like, anything that any man has done, that also speaks to me too, since I'm a man. So I was looking at myself as like in the category of man. I was looking at every man's potential or possibility as my own possibility, even though I had my own dispositions. But eventually I felt this way about all women too. I was like, and became sort of like I identify with the women as well, with the ways they wrong men, with the ways they wrong themselves, with the way they wrong men, wrong other women. And I saw it as a human issue, which I took on a Christian frame. Like there's a lot of hangovers from Christianity, but I saw the tendency for wrong by preference, curiosity, accident, and choice present as all. Like saw them present with all people. And so it's like basically I saw that people were sinners. And there were intentional, unintentional self-destruction, oblivious self-deception, fallacies, and incompetence. And I felt guilty of all agents' actions, not the agent of all actions. Like, because we're only responsible for your own agency and what you do, but you can still feel a sort of guilt, like sort of like how Germans may feel guilty about what uh, Germany did to the Jews and the Gypsies and the homosexuals and stuff like that during the Holocaust, and maybe even for World War II. Now, white people may feel, well, not white people, but that's its own topic. That's a really weird hodgepodge generalization that people tend to have, where they have this notion of white people. One, I feel like they should best put it as, I'll get into that another time. Anyway, so yeah, it fills our narrational and character-driven mind, invites a representative that accounts and redeems the wrongs of all, or is revenged upon. And I feel like this representative can be that of a group or that of an individual person and so on. I feel like, I guess in this regard, this how kind of scapegoating can be born. And it is probably a hangover from Christianity, but I characterize it as a potential aesthetic and moral fulfillment in humans, where like we we need like when something bad happens or when people do bad things or if a group does bad things, we might be resentful and want to take revenge. Basically, this is very self-explanatory. It's not that difficult to understand. And sometimes we may characterize the whole person or characterize the whole group as being viewed a certain way. Like there's a sense of you become what you do, or you become characterized by what you do. Where anything that you've done, that's what comes to characterize you. It's kind of like how Jesus said, it's not what goes into the mouth that corrupts you, but what comes out of the mouth. So in this case, what comes out of you as a person is what corrupts you or shows you to be, or in my case, I feel like people cover up their dignity, their inherent worth with their bad actions or with their lack of cultivation. Like instead of becoming ripened fruit, they start to decay or they mismanage themselves, they become unhealthy, and so on. Uh, this can go into the fabric of reality, but even with just humans, acts can stay in the memory and become a sense of possibility. The memory may have emotional fallacies and undeveloped orients towards self, others, and the world. I personally argue that there is a need to find a way towards forgiveness collectively, as well as individually, because unforgiveness eclipses the sun of holistic health, with resentment, paranoia, and ill will that negates hope and love. I think that's self-explanatory. I encourage there be an accuracy with logos with respect to the person. That is, even if I were a rapist or a murderer or a child molester or whatever, if I said something that's true or if I was characterizing a situation, then you have to evaluate it for its accuracy. You have to evaluate it for what it has to offer, irrespective to how you feel about me. At the same time, noting the facts of what has happened, even if ambiguous, and claiming our emotions on them and confronting is a fusion of care and confrontation. My sister gave me this word with ourselves and others in regards to worst tendencies, excitations, deviations, and so on with us. This is a sense of like, even if I were like a pastor or even if I were president, and even if I had done lots of good things or something like that, that you should still be keen about seeing how I am. Like I argue that also despite care with agape and unconditional love and regard for people, there needs to be a keenness towards potential wrong and perfection, what fosters these with ourselves and others. So I'm not saying to let people off the hook or to like look at people in a way that lets you be naive about what they can possibly do. I say you have to be wise. I guess that's really what this thing is about. Be wise and loving. Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov explores the abstract love of humanity versus embodied love. Like it's very easy to love people in the abstract, but to hate them face to face or to hate them in the immediate from a distance based on what they do or what they have done and stuff. And I feel like to love someone, there's a sense of you almost have to like I put it as love them in an embodied sense because you don't know how much you love someone till you're willing to do something for them in an embodied sense. That is like my mom takes care of has taken care of elderly people where she's changed their diapers, and I'm like that's a great act of care. Of course, you can do that, which like Like I'll get into that, but it's just there are different types of love, you know? Like there's agape, which is like unconditional love that helps you develop as a person, that develops people as persons, as John Vervaeke put it. There's philotora, which is self-love. There's philo, which is familial and brotherly or friendship love. Eros, which is like sexual, romantic love, and so on. And there's also detached love, and which I feel like these issues require detached love, such as a surgeon saving your life, where you dissect the situation without like letting your emotions getting involved. Or it's kind of like if you're in a war and you have to save your friend who's been shot or something, and you can't get emotionally scattered all over the place. You have to kind of clear your mind and relax and detach from the situation, and even detach from the fact that your friend is dying and pick them up and get them out of the situation. And I feel like that's one of the ways to engage this topic sometimes. Of course, you can engage it intimately, but I feel like the understanding part, the parts that comes with understanding and wisdom, requires sort of like non-attachment, this sort of detachment with it, and then you have to reattach into yourself to explore yourself and explore how you're feeling, explore your values, explore what's going on with you, and that's what will give you a better angle on things. So that's basically all I have to say, and maybe I'll go into my own struggles with, I guess, men are trash next time or something. Maybe I'll be more personable. But this is basically all I wanted to say. So thanks for listening, everybody. Bye bye.